I've seen some things in my time, things that would make a grown man cry, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I encountered that night in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm a former Navy SEAL, and I've served my country for a good part of my life. Seen war, seen death, seen the worst of humanity, but this was different. I was on a mission, a private one. A friend of mine, a local, had been complaining about strange happenings around his property, livestock disappearing, strange noises at night, the works. I figured it was probably a bear or a cougar, but he insisted it was something else. He'd lived in these parts all his life, and he swore up and down that he'd never seen or heard anything like it. The first night I was there, I set up camp near the edge of his property, where most of the disturbances had been reported. It was a clear night, the stars shining bright above the towering pines. I'd always had a connection to this area, having spent many summers here as a kid. The forests, the mountains, they were a part of me. But that night they felt different, unsettling. I was about to turn in when I heard it. A strange clicking noise like two stones being tapped together. It was coming from the tree line just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and my sidearm and I moved toward the sound. And then I saw it. It was crouched low to the ground, moving on all fours. It was pale, so pale it almost glowed in the moonlight. Its body was gaunt, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. But its face was something out of a nightmare. Large black eyes that seemed to absorb the light, a gaping mouth that looked like a void, and no nose, just smooth, pale skin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd faced down enemy combatants, stared death in the face, but this creature, it terrified me. It moved with a speed and agility that was unnatural, darting between the trees with a grace that belied its horrifying appearance. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. It watched me, its black eyes never leaving mine. I could hear the strange clicking noise again, louder now. It was coming from the creature. I retreated back to my camp, my mind racing. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And more importantly, what did it want? I spent the rest of the night awake, my eyes trained on the tree line. The creature didn't show itself again, but I could hear the clicking, a constant reminder of its presence. The next day, I started my investigation in earnest. I needed to know more about this creature, about what was happening in these woods. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that there was more to this story than I could see. And I was determined to find out what it was. Over the next few days, I started digging deeper. I talked to the locals, asked them if they'd seen or heard anything strange. Most of them brushed me off, said it was just the wildlife or the wind. But a few of them had stories. Stories of strange creatures in the woods, of livestock disappearing, of eerie noises in the night. One old man, a lifelong resident of the area, told me about the pale ones. According to him, they'd been around for as long as he could remember. They were creatures of the forest, he said, not meant to be seen by human eyes. He told me to leave them be, to let the forest have its secrets. But I couldn't do that. Not after what I'd seen. I spent my nights watching the tree line, waiting for the creature to show itself again. And every night, like clockwork, I'd hear the clicking. It was like it was taunting me, reminding me of its presence. But it never showed itself, never stepped out of the shadows. I started to question myself, started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, but then I'd hear the clicking, and I'd remember those black eyes, that gaping mouth. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew it was real. One night, about a week after my first encounter, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I needed to find it, needed to confront it. I packed my gear and set off, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my boots. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, could feel the unease settling in my stomach. And then there it was, the clicking. It was louder now, closer. I turned my flashlight towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. and there in the beam of light I saw it. The creature. The pale one. It was watching me, its black eyes reflecting the light. It was on all fours, its body low to the ground. It was still for a moment, and then it moved. It was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It darted between the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, as the silence of the forest closed in around me. The urge to follow was strong, but something held me back. A primal instinct, a warning from deep within. I knew then that I was not meant to follow, not meant to uncover the secrets of this creature. I turned back, retracing my steps through the forest. The clicking had stopped. The forest was silent once again. But the silence was different now. It was a respectful silence, a mutual understanding between me and the creature. I made it back to my camp just as the sun was rising. I packed up my gear, my mind racing. I had seen it, had seen the pale one. I had ventured into its territory, had heard its eerie clicking. I knew then that I couldn't stay, couldn't continue my investigation. I had seen too much, had gone too far. I left that morning, left the forest and the pale ones behind, but I can still hear the clicking, can still see those black eyes in my dreams. I know they're still out there, in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. I've been a park ranger at the Yosemite National Park for the past decade. It's been a good gig. Lots of the usual stuff, guiding tours, maintaining trails, dealing with lost hikers, you know, the typical ranger stuff. But lately, some things have been happening that are anything but typical. It all started with this one incident. I was on my usual patrol route when I got a call in the early evening about a disturbance near Half Dome. I was already in the area, so I responded. When I got there, I found a woman in her mid-30s, looking terrified and pointing at the sky. Now, Yosemite is a place of natural beauty. It's peaceful, it's well-maintained. But what she was pointing at was something I'd never seen before. She claimed she'd seen a UFO. At first, I thought she was just seeing things. Maybe she was dehydrated or had altitude sickness. But then I saw it too. A strange light in the sky, moving in ways that didn't make sense. But it gets weirder. As I was trying to calm her down and figure out what was going on, the light suddenly shot towards us. It was so fast it was just a blur, and then it was gone. I reported the incident, but it was dismissed as a possible drone or some kind of optical illusion. I didn't think much of it after that. A few weeks went by without any unusual incidents, and I thought maybe it was all over. But then it happened again, and again. Each time the light seemed to get closer and more intense. I don't mind telling you that it was starting to freak me out. The higher-ups started to worry about the safety of the hikers. Yosemite is a vast place with plenty of wilderness and remote areas. The park started increasing patrols in the area, but nothing seemed to deter the strange light. Then, almost exactly 2 weeks after the last sighting, another incident. This time the light didn't just appear and disappear. It stayed, hovering in the sky above the Half Dome. It was so bright it lit up the entire area. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was definitely not a drone or a plane. The light was so bright it was almost blinding. I had to shield my eyes with my hand just to look at it. It was pulsating, like a heartbeat, and it was making a low humming sound that I could feel in my chest. I radioed in the situation, but all I got was static. I tried again, but it was the same. It was like the light was interfering with the signal. I was alone with a strange light hovering above me. I won't lie, I was scared. I decided to head back to the ranger station, but as I turned to leave, the light moved. It shot across the sky, leaving a trail of light behind it, and then it was gone. Just like that. I stood there staring at the empty sky, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. But there was no logical explanation. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen or heard of before. The next day, I again reported the incident to my superiors. They were still skeptical, but they couldn't ignore the fact that something strange was happening in the park. They decided to bring in some experts to investigate. For the next few weeks, the park was swarming with scientists. They set up equipment and camped out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange light. But it never appeared. It was like it knew we were watching and decided to lay low. Just when we thought it was over, it happened again. This time it wasn't just a light. It was a full-blown UFO. It was hovering above Half Dome, just like before, but this time it was closer. It was so close I could make out details. It was round and metallic with lights all around it. It was silent except for that low hum that I could feel in my bones. As I stood there staring at the UFO, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was like I was meant to be there, like this was my destiny. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how I felt. Then, without warning, the UFO shot up into the sky and disappeared. It was so fast, it was just a blur of light. And then it was gone. Just like that. I stood there staring at the empty sky for what felt like an eternity. I was in awe, but also a little disappointed. I had so many questions, but I knew I would never get the answers. The next day, the park was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but I couldn't tell them. I couldn't put into words what I'd experienced. It was something you had to see to believe. In the weeks that followed, the sightings stopped. The scientists packed up their equipment and left, and the UFO enthusiasts moved on to the next hotspot. Life in the park went back to normal, but I was changed. I had seen something extraordinary, something otherworldly. I knew that we were not alone in the universe. And so I continue my work as a park ranger, guiding tours and maintaining trails. But every night I look up at the sky and I wonder if they'll come back, if I'll ever see that strange light again, and I really hope that I do. I'm a regular guy just like you. I work as a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a peaceful job most of the time, but this past winter things got a bit weird. Very weird. So I'm out there in the mountains, right? It's the off-season, not many folks around. My buddy and I, Joe, are out there doing our usual cleanup. We're trying to get everything tidied up before a big snow that was about to hit. Now there's this creek that runs through the area. People love to hang out there, but they leave a mess. So, Joe and I are walking along the creek, picking up trash. Suddenly, Joe spots something. He's got a keen eye for animal tracks, and he's found some that don't belong. There are these hoof prints, big ones, leading up to the creek and then back into the woods. But here's the kicker, they're bipedal. Like whatever made these tracks was walking on two legs. Weird, right? So we decide to follow the tracks. They lead us into the forest, and it's clear this thing is heavy. The tracks are deep and they're headed southeast. We're about 20 minutes into our trek when we catch a whiff of something foul. Smells like rotten eggs. We keep going and the smell gets stronger. The tracks lead us to this old hollowed-out tree. The smell is unbearable now. Joe checks out the tree and pulls out this thing. It's like a skin, but it's covered in scales. It's big, too, like human-sized. We're both freaked out at this point. We radio the other rangers, tell them what we found, and hightail it out of there. When we get back, the other rangers are full of questions. We show them the skin, and they're just as baffled as we are. The head ranger tells us to steer clear of that area for a while. Fast forward a few weeks. We've all been away because of the snow. When we get back, the first thing we do is check out the area where we found the skin. Nothing. No tracks, no skin, no weird smells. But over the next few months, we keep finding these pieces of scaled skin. They're smaller than the first one, but they have that same rotten egg smell. And then last week, Joe found more of those bipedal hoof prints near a campsite. I don't know what's going on, but it's got me worried. Whatever this thing is, it's been keeping a low profile, but I'm not sure how long that'll last. A couple of weeks after Joe found those tracks, I was out on patrol. It was late, the sun was setting, and I was about to call it a day. I was walking along the creek, just enjoying the quiet, when I heard a rustling in the bushes. I turned around, and there it was. This creature standing on two legs just a few yards away from me. I froze, not sure what to do. It was big, bigger than any man I've ever seen. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in scales, just like the skin we found. They were a dark green color, almost black. The scales were rough and jagged, like they could cut you if you touched them. It had a long, thick tail that swished back and forth slowly. Its legs were muscular and ended in hooves, just like the tracks we found. But its upper body, that's where things got really weird. It had arms long and muscular, with hands that ended in sharp claws. And its face, it was almost human, but not quite. It had a long snout with sharp teeth that glinted in the fading sunlight. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, and they were fixed on me. I stood there frozen in fear as it watched me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there watching me with those yellow eyes. I don't know how long we stood there staring at each other. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then without warning, it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood there for a moment trying to process what I had just seen. Then I turned and ran back to the ranger station. I told the other rangers what I saw, and they were just as shocked as I was. We decided to keep a closer eye on the area and to warn any visitors to be careful. I don't know what that creature is or where it came from, but I do know one thing. It's out there. That devil creature is out there in the Appalachian Mountains, and I have a feeling it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I attend college in Boston, and as you might know, the place is full of stories about the great American road trip. We got Route 66, cross-country tours, national parks, all of it. But you kind of get used to it, really. I never really took it seriously and felt that most of it's for show, for the tourists. I figured as a student, I was above all that. I knew what to believe and what not to. Not like the folks driving around in their RVs gawking at landmarks. That was before I turned 20, finished my sophomore year, and decided to take a summer road trip across the U.S. I work part-time at a library on campus, so I wanted to do something different, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to afford it. The road is long, but it has a certain charm, and if you work during the school year, it's much easier to afford a trip when you don't have to worry about classes. I figured it was worth a try, though, and I went online to plan. When I saw the cost of this used van on Craigslist, I thought maybe it was a typo because it was so low. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I called. The seller seemed weirdly happy that I'd called, so I thought the van must be a total clunker. I agreed to meet him at his place the next day, though. He also seemed insistent that we do it before it got dark. He kept reminding me not to be late. So after work the next day, I drove over there. The van was parked in a lot full of used cars and trucks. The van was a classic Volkswagen. I don't want to say the color, but it's kind of a hippie symbol. The type of vehicle that screams road trip and has bumper stickers from all over the country. You had to climb in through the side door to get into it. Once you were in there, though, it was cozy. Comfortable seats, wooden interior, just enough space for one person to sleep. An older stove in the back, but that was fine. I didn't cook much. The back window looked out onto a nice view of wherever you parked. I liked it and gave him a verbal commitment, but the seller couldn't take my cash quick enough. I wondered if he had a gambling problem or something, because he seemed to need that money pretty bad. I drove off a few days later and everything was fine. It's an old van like a lot of them on the road, so the engine kind of groaned, and I couldn't use too many appliances at once or the fuse would trip, but that was okay. That first night, though, I had a weird urge to buy a camera. I don't take photos, but that Polaroid at the corner store called my name. I didn't want to because that stuff's not cheap, but I also wanted to. Had to, really. When I got back, I was going to put it in the cabinet, but something told me to put it on the dashboard. Something like almost a voice. Almost, but not enough to scare me. Not yet. Over the next few days, I started noticing an extra photo in the morning. I don't always remember taking pictures, and a lot of times I meet people on the road or just stop at a scenic spot. So I wasn't really sure. Did we take 4 photos last night or 3? After a week, I decided I'd make sure the camera was empty before I went to bed, just to see. Sure enough, in the morning, there was a photo on the dashboard. I'd forgotten about the Polaroid. I finally put the two together and checked the film. It was half empty. I started to freak out. Who was taking photos at night? Why? I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, but it still happened. Someone must have a key, I figured. I listened but didn't hear anything. Yet the photos kept appearing, and the film level got lower. I finally set up a camera pointed at the dashboard. It would have to pick up whoever was doing this. By this point, I was terrified, and my hands were shaking the next morning when I checked the footage. It showed nothing, but the photo was still there. I watched it over and over, but I didn't see anything. Finally, I turned the volume up as high as it could go, and I heard something like a voice on the video, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want anyone thinking I was crazy. I decided to go to the local diner instead. Waitresses have heard it all, right? I ordered a coffee and asked the waitress what she knew about the van. She said she's only been working at the diner for a year, so she doesn't know the whole story, but she heard a guy was found dead in a similar van after a road trip. Since then, no one has bought the van for more than a couple of months, she said. Most people just sell it, leave the memories, and move on. I asked her what she could tell me about the guy, and she said supposedly he used to travel a lot. Photography? I asked. She said, "Yeah, how'd you know?" I've been following your show for a while now, and I figured it's about time I shared an experience of my own. I can hardly believe it myself. It happened in my first year on the job as a park ranger in the depths of the Everglades. One night on my usual patrol, I saw something bizarre. I was on my usual patrol, walking around with my flashlight, checking on the wildlife and ensuring campers were settled. Suddenly, I noticed something near the water's edge. At first, I figured it was just another gator. We see plenty of them in the park. But as I moved closer, I realized this was something entirely different. It was a figure, around 7 feet tall, hunched over like it was examining something on the ground. The creature was covered in scales, kind of a greenish color that shimmered slightly in the beam of my flashlight. It had long arms, longer than any humans, ending in what looked like claws. The sight was disturbingly abnormal. Its head was strange, too, like a cross between an alligator's and a human's, round but with those reptilian features. I called out, maybe in a vein, hoping that it was a prankster in a costume, but the reaction I got gave me chills. The creature turned to face me, and its eyes, they were just wrong. They glowed in the flashlight, bright yellow with slits for pupils, just like a reptile. I was rooted to the spot, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. Before I could gather my wits, the creature slipped silently into the water, leaving me standing there in the silent fog. The next day, when I shared my story with the other rangers, they laughed it off, suggesting it was the product of a long night and an overactive imagination. But I couldn't just forget what I'd seen. So I began digging through the park's old records and found similar sightings dating back decades, descriptions of the same reptilian humanoid, the same eerie eyes, the same silent disappearance. This left me with a strange cocktail of emotions. I was relieved to find I wasn't alone in my sighting, but it was unnerving to think there might be some truth in what I saw. Ever since, on my patrols, even though I've never encountered the creature again, I often feel watched. The feeling is strongest by the water's edge, where I first saw it. It's a prickling sensation, the sense of unseen eyes tracking my movement. So strange. Anyway, that's my story. I know it might sound far-fetched, but I promise you, I couldn't make this up even if I tried. I would like to add one more thing about this creature's power. I've seen countless gators in my time here. I've seen them hunt, fight, and assert their dominance over the waterways. But this creature, it was different. The sheer size of it was one thing. It towered at about 7 feet tall, significantly bigger than even the largest gators we get in these parts. And its arms, they were thick and muscular, like it could snap a tree branch in half without breaking a sweat. There was a grace to its movements, too, an eerie fluidity that seemed both alien and yet eerily familiar. While a gator possesses a primal, raw strength, this creature seemed to radiate a calculated power. It moved with purpose and intelligence. The way it slipped into the water, barely causing a ripple despite its size, it suggested a creature perfectly adapted to its environment and possibly at the top of the food chain. No gator, no matter how large or ferocious, has ever given me the chills the way this creature did. Its presence seemed to silence the marsh around us, and even after it disappeared, it took a while for the sounds of the swamp to return. You know, before I settled into this quiet life, I was an FBI agent, stationed at a facility so remote it felt like the edge of the world. We conducted experiments there, the kind that would make your blood run cold. One experiment in particular has stayed with me. It involved a creature, a beast that looked like a nightmarish blend of man and wolf. It was enormous, muscles bulging under its thick fur, and it had these eyes, these haunting yellow eyes that seemed to glow with an inner fire. I only ever saw it from a distance, but even from afar its raw power was palpable. It was like standing next to a roaring furnace, you know? You could feel the heat, the danger just radiating off it. They released it into this fenced-off area, a sort of nature reserve, filled with all sorts of wildlife. I don't know why they did it, but this creature was designed to kill. And it did. I won't go into the grisly details, but it was a sight that still haunts my dreams. I've seen some strange things in my time at that facility, things that would make a hardened man shiver. But that creature, it was something else. It was like it was from another world. And the way it moved, the way it hunted, it was like watching a force of nature. After witnessing that creature, my days at the facility were never the same. Every creak, every shadow, every unexpected sound, it all made me think of the beast. I couldn't shake the image of its muscular form, its yellow eyes, the way it moved with such deadly grace. I tried to find out more about it, but it was like hitting a brick wall. No one would talk. No one would even acknowledge that the creature existed. It was like we were all part of some unspoken pact to pretend it was just a figment of our imaginations. But I knew what I saw. I knew that creature was real. And I knew it was still out there in that fenced-off area, doing what it was designed to do. The thought of it kept me up at night, kept me on edge during the day. I started to notice other strange things at the facility too. Unexplained occurrences, things that didn't add up. Like how some of the wildlife in the fenced-off area would just disappear without a trace. Or how sometimes late at night I'd hear these low, guttural sounds echoing through the halls. I asked questions, tried to get answers, but it was always the same response: silence, evasion, denial. It was like everyone was too afraid to talk and too afraid to admit what was really going on. I guess I'm the brave one, and it feels good to finally tell my story.